past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Well, greetings and welcome back as always. It's being reported that nearly 7 million demonstrators in more than 2,500 locations across the United States showed up to No King's protests to rally against Donald Trump's presidency, according to organizers. Other than expressing displeasure with the Trump administration's policies, what demands were being made? What action is to be taken? Who is behind this? What are the people being called to do? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. With each show, my guests and I provide insight and analysis into current events and the broader historical context in which most of these events take place. Let's quickly look at some of today's headlines. Hegseth announces 7th U.S. bombing of boat in the Caribbean. Trump also confirmed that a strike last week left 2 survivors. That's a problem. U.S. Secretary of Defense Hegseth announced yesterday that the U.S. military bombed another boat in the Caribbean and killed 3 so-called terrorists, making the 7th known U.S. strike on a vessel in the region since the bombing campaign began on September 2nd. One of the questions that people need to continually ask Hegseth and Trump: how do you know they're terrorists if they aren't afforded due process? As usual, Hegseth claimed the vessel was carrying drugs, but provided no evidence to back up the claim. This while, on Saturday, Trump confirmed that the U.S. struck a vessel last Thursday and left 2 survivors, an Ecuadorian and a Colombian. The president said, now listen to this, they're being sent to their home countries, quote, for detention and prosecution, end quote. Again, no due process. Targeted a so-called submarine, and the video he posted of the strike appears to show a submersible being hit with a missile. No evidence, again, has been presented to support Trump's claim of pending prosecution. And if these individuals were in fact or are in fact involved in drug trafficking, why, and Donald Trump caught them, why isn't he prosecuting them? Answer: the story's a lie. That's the answer. Now, to that point, top admiral steps down abruptly amid alleged drug boat strikes. Admiral Alvin Halsey abrupt departure as head of U.S. Southern Command, which oversees the U.S. military operations in Latin America, comes as Trump has conducted lethal strikes against alleged Venezuelan drug trafficking vessels in the Caribbean. U.S. forces have destroyed, now it's reported, up to seven boats. Here's an interesting question. Did the U.S. just kill a random fisherman? Colombian President Gustavo Petro has accused the United States of murdering one of his people, an innocent fisherman, in a strike intended for boats carrying drugs and narco traffickers. I think Admiral Halsey understood that as this story would start to unravel, if they didn't blame him, he would be caught up in the dragnet and did not want any part of Trump's foolishness. On today's episode, the issue before us is the No Kings rally. The New York Times reports they were teachers and lawyers, military veterans, and fired government employees, children and grandmothers, students and retirees, arriving in droves across the country in major cities and small towns. They appeared in costumes, blared music, brandished signs, hoisted American flags, and cheered at the honks of passing cars. But again, my question in all of this is, to what end? They marched on Saturday as they left the rallies and headed home. What were they directed or inspired to do? What's the mission? What's the ongoing agenda? Let's talk to my guest. He's a teacher, analyst, human rights activist, and just a phenomenal human being. KJ No, as always, my brother, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
So let me just start with, is the question or are the questions that I just posed reasonable questions to ask about these No Kings rallies or marches?
Absolutely. I think they're very reasonable questions to ask. You know, what is the goal? What do you intend to accomplish? What's the follow-up? What are the demands? I think this needs to be made very clear. But you can see that this is designed to capture the discontent that is ambient in the country right now. Everybody is unhappy, and we know that something is terribly wrong, and people are speaking out. And they're, very obvious and visible things that people are protesting against. Certainly, the treatment of immigrants. Certainly, certain actions that have been taken by the government. These are clear and obvious things that people are protesting. But the larger question that has to be addressed is, we know that something is wrong. And how do you diagnose what that illness is? And unfortunately, this movement, while it was giving legitimate space for people of all stripes to come out on the streets and protest, whether it is actually going to be effective or whether it's simply going to be sheepdogged into the PR arm of the Democratic Party, I think that is a legitimate question to ask as well.
You just said that this is designed to capture the malcontent. And the first thing that came to my mind was the dog that catches the car. What does the dog do once it catches the car? So you mentioned the Democratic Party as well. And because my next question behind that, and this is the same question that Kevin Baptist was posing here, whose money is behind this? And you mentioned the Democrat Party, which I think is a important indicator as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that the early organizers are both Move On and Indivisible, which are essentially appendages of the Democrat Party. We know that if you want to do something like this, it requires tremendous amounts of organization and, yes, money. So once again, you have to follow the money. Now, of course, this isn't to say that the demands that people are making or the fact that people are coming together and making demands and protesting is wrong. I mean, I think there's a lot that is going wrong. Essentially, to put it into a nutshell, the empire is collapsing. And as empires collapse, as capitalist empires collapse, they trend towards fascism. In fact, you can argue that fascism is really capitalism in decay. But the framing of this, I think if you had said that this was a protest against, for example, no oligarchs, no plutocrats, no rentier capitalists, no genocidal rentier capitalists, I think that would have gotten much, much more people out on the streets. Instead, what we saw was there was a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, stage managing, and also setting an Overton window,
Mm-hmm.
and managing the the discourse. For example, if we had said no oligarchs, or no plutocrats, that would have very rapidly made the Democrats who are, organizing this very, very unhappy. So we know that there are some deep contradictions involved. Now, I think there's very much a trend to turn this into a purely anti-Trump demonstration. Trump must go. But we have to understand that there's a lot of discontent. Much of it goes far, far beyond any single president, or certainly Trump himself. I think that people understand that the system is foundationally broken and delegitimated. I think people are outraged at the ongoing genocide, which both the Democrats and the Republicans have been supporting. And so I think there's somebody who has worked very hard on the branding,
Mm-hmm.
no kings. And they wanted to make sure that this was a big tent kind of product that they could roll out, but they also wanted to make sure that it was maximally inclusive and also maximally mystifying. And I see that mystification also going on.
Inclusive and mystifying. And Aziz says, no kings had a motto, hands off NATO, the terrorist organization. And to that point, my question isn't about mottos. My issue isn't about slogans or sloganeering. It's about action. That's why I asked at the top, when the folks were done with their rally and they were heading to their cars, or they were getting on the train, or when they got home and they were so relieved and pleased with themselves at the wonderful turnout, what's the course of action being demanded? What are the people supposed to do now? Otherwise, what I saw in KJ, if I'm being too simplistic here, or if I'm being too critical, please tell me. Otherwise, it was a big ass puppet show.
Yeah, I mean, it was highly performative. It was demonstration to send, quote unquote, a message. It was largely demonstrative and performative. But you're absolutely right. What is the follow-up? What are the actions? Where is the organization? And I think that's the piece that is being mystified, which lets us know that people are just, going to be used unless they claw back, the organization and the movement to make real demands. As the, listener pointed out, a protest that says hands off NATO is a protest that has deep, deep contradictions and propaganda mixed into its, into its agenda. Of course, there were also strong protests, for immigrant rights. There were strong protests, strong statements for, to stop the genocide of the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And these are all important things that people need to turn out and speak out on. But once again, there was a lot of curation. We know that there were, battles over who got to speak. There was a real attempt to moderate some of the stronger demands that I think are being deeply felt by people. And I think that, the fact that there was not a meaningful movement building and organizational structure involved in taking actions lets us know that this is being used in very specific ways by a specific party.
And, being used in very specific ways by very specific parties. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, Morgan Jackson. It was not a show. It was meant to show Trump that most Americans are against him. Well, let's be very, very careful in our language, because there are 360 million people in the country. I want to say there are about 170 million eligible voters. Is that right? Trump got, was it 77 million votes? 7 million people showed up. So let's be sure, let's be very careful about our language here. Most Americans are against him. I don't know that the results of that march reflect that statement. But let's go somewhere else. Because as you know, I have been dubbed, and Willie Hicks, thank you so much for that $20 super secret. I'm gonna get you to your point in a second. I am dubbed Dr. Data. CNBC All-American Economic Survey released Friday found 55% of Americans disapprove of Trump's handling of the economy, while 42% approve. That's a negative 13 approval rating on the economy. 56% of Americans disapproved of Trump's tariff policies, while 41% disapprove. But here's the problem with all of these numbers, KJ. Democrats are doing worse than Donald Trump. The Democratic Party garnered 33.6% favorable rating, 59.8% unfavorable rating. So when someone says this is showing that most people are against Donald Trump, I don't know that the data reflects that to be accurate, KJ.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that it is what the mainstream media is trying to make it out to be. Certainly, demonstration counts are always highly contested. Yes. And usually the media, which is strongly influenced, which has strong, a lot of the mainstream media has a strong connection to the Democratic Party. Usually the mainstream media tends to undercount demonstrations. But in this case, it seems like they're overcounting or doing a different kind of math than they usually do. Usually the estimates are very, very conservative. Here, the estimates do not seem to be conservative. And so I think there's an interesting agenda going on there. There's interesting math going on there. But I think the key thing to understand is that, yes, there are a lot of people who are upset with Trump, just as there are a lot of people who voted for Trump who are very, very upset with the Democratic Party. And what it boils down to is that there are a lot of people who are very, very upset. And that upset has to do with some deep structural issues that are going on right now. And of course, there are people who are offended by President Trump because unlike, say, for example, Joe Biden or even Barack Obama, instead of like picking your pocket, you're being mugged in,
broad daylight.
Yes, but I mean, both parties are rubbed blind, and I think that some people take offense to the manner of which they are being robbed, but it doesn't deeply change the fact that people are being robbed. That's why the working classes are impoverished. That's why we don't have functioning schools, infrastructure systems. That's why, nothing seems to be working anymore. And I think there's a deep malaise in the country that people are feeling. They see things are not going well, and they also see the insults to their communities and also in foreign affairs, and they're coming out and expressing that. That is good, but this has to be organized and directed towards meaningful action rather than being subsumed under a party agenda, which you can see that some of that has been part of the plan.
some of that has been part of the plan. And Willie Hicks, again, thank you for that $20 super sticker. American domestic and foreign policy is corrupt as the day is long, and it goes beyond administration or party. You are absolutely correct. The people were sincere in the protest. I'm leery of the organizers. And, oh, trust me, I am in no way, shape, or form questioning or challenging or trying to impugn the sincerity or the integrity of those that went out and marched. But the point here is, for me anyway, they were asked and motivated to come out to a protest. And I believe that right now we are in such a critical moment that the time for puppet shows has passed. And now is the time for organized, concerted action, because it is organized, concerted action that is being taken upon our democracy. And so there has to be a, as if not more, formidable response to the action. What does Newton say? Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Well, I don't see that with the puppet show. So, and all of that really, KJ, to get to this, when you looked at the visuals, when you looked at the footage, or let me put it another way, when I looked at the footage, what I saw, mostly white people. Mostly white people were participating in that protest. And from the data that I've read, they were middle class. So where are the people of color? Where are the poor and the working class? Which ironically are the cohorts or the constituency that the Democrats are losing the most ground with the quickest. KJ, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think you're absolutely right on. And, you know, the easy answer to where are the working class is the working class is working.
They're at work.
They're at work, and they're
Right.
working nonstop. They're working 2, 3, 4 jobs. And, you know, we know, I mean, let's, you know, do the analysis. As I said, you know, fascism is capitalism in decay. What do I mean by that? You know, capitalism creates monopoly corporations. It's very simple. If you ever played the game of Monopoly, eventually one person gets monopoly, right? So capitalism with a free market structure creates, if it's left to its own devices, it creates monopoly corporations. And these monopolies essentially do two things. They gouge you, and then they inshitify everything. Pardon my language. And then they financialize. So, and at the same time, everybody else, the working classes, they become immiserated. They get less and less for their money. They're gouged everywhere they turn for the basics, for electricity, for groceries, for your internet, and they're paid less and less. And so what we have is, you know, a dog-eat-dog society, or really a dog-eat-shit world. It's all going wrong. Nothing works. Nothing is, you know, decent, just, or even rational. And so people are out there protesting, and they see their neighbors getting rounded up. They see the ongoing wars, the continuous escalation to war, you know, the genocide in Gaza, the escalation to war with Venezuela, escalation to war with China, the looming war with Iran. And everybody is fed up about this. And so they want some change. But what happens is each time they're co-opted and misdirected and mystified, you know, through, you know, each party, you know, comes forth and pretends that it's going to do things differently. And then the same thing happens. So it's, you know, it's this kind of ongoing brutality that is hitting people in the face, as well as the ongoing deceit. People don't like that. And of course, they're sincere in their protests, but at the same time, these protests, as they are conceived and directed by some of the organizers, are designed to be mystifying and to misdirect. And I think that's wrong. I think deeper changes are needed, and I think people sense that as well.
Two points from Morgan Jackson. One, speaking of the popular vote in 2024, Kamala Harris received 75 million. That's true. So Trump isn't as popular as you think he is. I'm not making any assessment or any analysis on how popular he is or how popular he is not. Again, I just went through the numbers to show in the most recent polling, his numbers are in the toilet. I know the man isn't popular. That was not the point. But here's another point from Morgan Jackson. If the Democrats win the midterms, and KJ, this was actually where I was going next. If the Democrats win the midterms next year, they can begin to fight back against Trump's domestic policies. But the problem is, again, looking at the numbers, the Democrats' numbers are worse than Trump's. And one of the big mistakes I think a lot of people are making, and Morgan, I'm not assigning this to you because you haven't spoken to this, but it just makes me think about something else. Another mistake that a lot of people are making is that they are equating the 7 million people that turned out for the No Kings March. They're equating that to those people will vote for Democrats. And that's not true. And I think that's a big mistake that the Democrats made in 2024 with Kamala Harris, and thinking that she was going to be able to garner more support because people were so disgusted with Donald Trump. It didn't turn out that way. And in fact, I just saw an article today, I think it might have been in the Financial Times, that talked about, in terms of the midterm numbers, the Democrats are in serious, serious trouble. I try to pull it up. KJ.
Yes, they are in serious trouble because they've completely delegitimated themselves. I mean, they had many, many chances, and each time people vote for them because they're opposed to, the other party, they continue the policies of the same. They continue the same policies and just make them worse. I mean, let's think of Obamacare. I mean, this was originally a Republican proposal. It's just, now it's being rebranded and made even worse. Same thing with foreign policy. Anything that was bad, that was done by the other party, has simply been continued and made worse, and vice versa, in both ways. So, there is really no meaningful difference. And I think that when we are constantly fed, this choice of Pepsi versus Coke, I think that, this is really the distraction. This is how, the mystification and this is how the confidence trick works. I think that there has to be a deeper understanding of how the system works, how the deep state agenda continues across different administrations. And then we have to understand, the fundamental nature of the corrupt and unfair system that needs to be changed. And we don't see that happening. I mean, we see it in small pockets, but I don't think that the change is going to come through legislation. First, because even if, as you point out, the Democrats are highly unlikely to win the next legislative election. But even if they were, would they fight back? We know that they don't. They won't fight back because they're essentially, they essentially want the same things. They just, want them in different packages and different labels.
I read both of these. Polls reveal warning signs for Democrats ahead of midterms. That's Newsweek. The Hill reports Democrats might be doomed to a 2026 disappointment. Even as Trump placed his hand on a Bible for the second time, Democrats have clung to hope the midterms will save us. In a sense, as an attributable goal. Well, anyway, the point being that they've got serious headwinds in front of them. And here's something that I think is real practical evidence of this. The New York mayoral race. Mamdani is speaking a very broad populist message and is beating and is winning this thing hands down. And the Democrats can't get out of their own way and endorse their own damn candidate. Hakeem Jeffries was just asked on Sunday, when are you going to endorse this man? And his answer, well, I expect to have some very productive conversations with him in the next coming days. What? That is a very, very bad impression of Hakeem Jeffries, but I was trying to convey the sense, not the man. And that's foolish. They're not endorsing their own candidate. KJ.
Yeah, so, the contradictions are very, very deep. They certainly, it's the same way in which they refuse to support Bernie Sanders, terribly flawed as he was. And Sanders would not have, made a difference. But even so, just the mere, hint that this person might not be within, that very, very tight, narrow bandwidth that they approve of means that they are stinting, they're uncertain about him. So the contradictions are so deep, and I think it just speaks to the Democratic Party as a spent force. I don't think that they are capable of understanding the political tides or appealing to the population in any meaningful way.
And Willie Hicks says, and again, Willie, thank you for that $20 super sticker. I believe that there were not many people of color because Black people tried to tell America this would happen all along, and brown people are wary of ICE. Trump made white folks mad. I think you're absolutely right, particularly on the front of there are many in the African-American community that have said, look, you all elected him. We didn't. This is your fight, not ours. To which I would say, well, you may be right. This is their fight, not ours, but it's our problem. And you can't, and I mean, we can go through the historic data and understand the disparity in economies and all of the healthcare and all of those kinds of things. I understand all of that, and how no matter who gets elected in the White House, African Americans still get screwed. Look at Barack Obama. We didn't fare well during that 8 years period when everybody thought we would be saved. But again, we didn't, speaking generally, we didn't vote for him. It's not, we didn't cause this. It's not our fight. Maybe not our fight, but it damn sure is our problem. When you look at the disparity in layoffs and all those other kinds of things, if we don't jump in this fight with both feet, but we have to understand who to fight and how to fight and what to fight, we're going to have some serious problems. KJ.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it is our problem. It is the country's problem. In fact, it's the entire world's problem.
Correct.
Because what the U.S. does really does have an impact, not only on our communities, but on the entire planet. So it is our problem. And then the question is really, but how do you diagnose the problem and how do you take action from that? I mean, let's just think of, one issue around immigration. The United States had a kind of a free immigration policy until the end of slavery. And then it started to create a separate category of illegal immigrant. Why? Because they needed to create larger groups of disenfranchised people that they could exploit endlessly, which isn't to say that slavery ended. It's continued in different forms and in different types of, the violence simply morphed and turned into different forms. But you use slave labor or disenfranchised labor as a way of disciplining the working class. And so you saw this with the Biden administration. They were using large amounts of immigrant labor to essentially discipline and to control the working class, not to mention the fact that, we had, 1 million people who passed away because of COVID, because of mismanagement of COVID. So these are some deep contradictions. And now, in this, amateurish fashion, the Trump administration is pressing the accelerator and then pressing the stop, the brake, and just going back and forth, jerking back and forth. But it has a much more fortress, isolationist approach towards immigration. Again, that's going to be problematic because a large amount of both the unskilled and skilled labor is done by immigrants. And so by sealing off and creating and deporting large amounts of immigrants and refugees and even other people who are even citizens, the administration is going to create deep contradictions and pressures inside its economy, which is already cracking from the stress. And so, once again, it's a system and a policy that has no coherence other than its adherence to this notion of maximal profit for the ruling elite and maximum control of the working class, the underclass, and of people of color. And so there's that continuity which is ongoing, but you see these abrupt shifts in surface policy that are just driving everybody, out of their minds.
Actually, a policy of no cohesiveness and driving people out of their minds. You're absolutely right. Let me just quickly ask folks right now, if you could, please hit that like button and share the link. The first part of this program is very important. It helps impact the algorithms which determine so many things relative to this program. So if you all could quickly, even if you don't agree with everything that's being said on the show, you can't question the quality of the analysis and the quality of my guests. So if you don't do it for me, do it for KJ. Let KJ know how much you like and love him, and because of how brilliant he is. Switching areas, KJ. You talked about no coherence. Trump backs off Tomahawk suggestion after Zelensky meeting. Zelensky came to the White House on Friday, and just like the last time, for all intents and purposes, got run out of town. And again, with no missiles to show for it, at least right now. And I think the language was that Trump told him that if you don't follow, or if you don't agree to Putin's demands and give up some territory, he's going to, I think the word was, obliterate Ukraine. KJ, no cohesive, sensible policy. KJ, no.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly, what's going on. When you know that you have an amateur driver, when they keep on pressing the accelerator and the brake and the accelerator and the brake, right? I mean, they don't have a vision or long-term understanding of where they're going and how they want to get there.
They're making the fundamental mistake that amateur drivers make. They're trying to drive with both feet instead of using the right foot.
Exactly. Exactly, right. And so this constant tacking and acceleration and deceleration braking. I mean, this is a signal that people don't know what they're doing. But once again, the larger picture is that the United States originally wanted to bleed Russia out. It wanted to give Russia a strategic defeat in Ukraine, and it thought that it could do that readily and easily because Russia was simply a gas station with pretensions. They were quite confident that they would be able to destroy Russia, bring it down very, very rapidly with a mixture of kinetic engagement, the kind of bloodletting along the frontier, as well as massive economic sanctions. Well, that didn't turn out that way. The sanctions actually hurt Europe much more than Russia. Russia's economy is strong and continues to develop. And also in terms of the bloodletting, in terms of strategic defeat, it seems to have worked the other way around. I mean, Europe is in shambles. Ukraine is practically a destroyed, failed state. And the US is realizing that it's actually happening the other way around. It's the US treasure and logistics and weaponry which is being drained out in the Ukraine-Russia war. And so now they want to disengage from it. And they're finding it very, very hard to do that. So they're trying to send the message to Zelensky, you need to, staunch the bleeding because we need to put this on hold for a while. It's not that they've given up on taking down Russia, but it's just not the way, the sequencing is not working. And we want to, kind of seal this in amber for a while we prepare for the real, main course, which is war with China. And we don't have, enough weaponry, or we can't afford the weaponry. We need it elsewhere. I mean, they've literally said that we need our tomahawks for something else. That's something else being war with China. And so Zelensky is getting slapped around, and certainly he's very, very disappointed. But, tomahawks are an extraordinary escalatory and dangerous weapon. They're subsonic, which means that they're going to be used in preemptive attacks. They're not counter-strike weaponry. They're preemptive attacks because that's how that subsonic dimension requires that they be used offensively. And the other piece is that they're dual-use weapons. That is to say that they can also carry tactical nuclear weapons. And so if you have tomahawks going towards Russia, towards a major city or a strategic outpost, the Russians do not have a way of distinguishing whether this is conventional or nuclear. And so the escalatory risks are so high. And so unless the US wants to turn this into a nuclear conflagration, they need to back down. And it looks like this is what they have done for a variety of reasons, but certainly because they're not ready to go toe-to-toe just right now. They want a little bit of a timeout. And so, of course, this doesn't help, or this doesn't serve the agenda of the ruling elite, that are getting rich off Ukraine, including the Zelensky and his, cohort. And so they want to keep pushing. It's not working. And the Europeans are unhappy. They're feeling this kind of separation anxiety because they're being drained. Their pockets are being drained. The European society, European standards of living is being drained for, this U.S. proxy war. So it's a debacle on so many dimensions. And yet the ruling class are not responding to the needs and the demands of the vast majority of people who want nothing with this war. They just want it to end.
And that's been one of the incredibly significant and confusing disconnects. For example, we go, you mentioned the sanctions hurt Europe much more than Russia. One could make the argument that was the intent from the very beginning. If you use the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline as your during the Biden administration as your stake in the ground and go forward, that having to do with two things. One, cutting off the supply of cheap oil and natural gas to Europe, therefore contributing to the deindustrialization of Europe and hoping to stimulate the reindustrialization of the United States and forcing Europeans to buy much more expensive natural gas from the United States. Thank you, Ted Cruz, for that brilliant idea. So you're right. There are so many conflicting actions here. We all go back to Joe Biden telling us he was going to turn the ruble into rubble. Well, in the words of the church lady, how's that working out for you? Not very well. And so there's a huge disconnect between what the ruling elite in Europe are doing in terms of blindly following the United States down the rabbit hole versus what their people are screaming about in the street. These neoliberal policies are decimating their established standard of living.
You're absolutely right. I mean, it's horrific. What's going on in Europe is essentially a reversion to, the pre-World War II era. I mean, Europe developed rapidly over the past 70 years and created a semblance of, well-run welfare states in, for example, in Northern Europe. And all of that has gone out the window. But as you point out, this is deliberate. It's as the empire unwinds, it's cannibalizing its vassals. And certainly, the closest vassal for it to cannibalize is Europe. It's very similar to what happened during World War II, where the US became rich off the destruction of Europe. This is a similar type of dynamic. And in particular, as you pointed out, yes, the bombing of Nord Stream, the blowing up of Nord Stream, we always have to ask, who benefited, right? I mean, Blinken alluded to the benefits of blowing up Nord Stream. But the thing is, an industrial society, an industrial economy lives and dies on energy, on its access to energy and its access in particular to cheap or affordable energy. When that energy is cut off, you've essentially created a formula for deindustrialization. And of course, on the superficial level, it looks like this was an attempt to reindustrialize the United States, as many other strategies seem to be currently vis-a-vis, tariffs regarding other countries. But the industrialization horse has left the barn for the United States. As I said, monopoly capital, once it hits that monopoly stage, it no longer needs to make things. Instead, it just claims money. It's that movement from, money to commodities to more money, and you simply collapse that into money asking for more money or money demanding more money. This is the financialized process. And so we have deindustrialization in the United States. And along with deindustrialization, we have de-skilling. We no longer have the workforce that is capable of doing those kinds of productive tasks. And then instead, what you have is massive financialization and people simply claiming money. That's why, every time you order a burrito, DoorDash asks you if you want to pay for it in four, installments, right? And then they'll set you up, and next thing you know, you're paying interest on your burrito.
And no extra cheese.
Yes, but extra interest. So, I mean, this is how the system is set up. It's set up to gouge, it's set up to poopify, and it's set up to, it's set up so that the contradictions are so deep that they cannot be resolved in a normal fashion. And of course, the thing that I always worry about, as if we didn't have enough to worry about, is, the defibrillator or the reset button is war. And it looks like we have multiple wars brewing, as well as the war in, the proxy war in the Ukraine. So this is the dangerous situation that we're in. And of course, the ruling elite are perfectly fine to keep things going as they are, because they cannot imagine having things different. They're perfectly fine to continue to deindustrialize, to continue to deskill, to continue to financialize. And, if there are contradictions and protests, we'll just clamp them down with more force while we prepare for war. And this is this is really the core situation that we're facing.
I've got two more questions and a comment. Can you give me a couple more minutes?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, great, thank you. Kevin Baptiste, thank you. How can the Dems claim to fight any inconsistencies in the U.S. policy when they themselves are responsible for the inconsistencies? You're absolutely right on that one, Kevin. And we can just look at Ukraine. Barack Obama was very clear. Arming Ukraine is a bad idea. There are a lot of issues I can take with him on a number of things he said and did, such as taking out Gaddafi and a whole bunch of other stuff. But on that point, he was absolutely right. And then you look at the guy that was his vice president, who comes into office and does exactly the opposite stupid thing. And we find ourselves right back in the same mess. KJ, you said that deindustrialization has left the barn. And one of the things that I think is very, very important for people to understand is that industrialization doesn't happen without an industrial plan. If there's no industrial plan, you're not going to industrialize. You may attract some companies to come to your country and do business. You may attract BMW to come to South Carolina. You may attract Mercedes to come to Alabama, I think, and Kentucky. I think that's where they are. But that's not a industrial plan that's going to lead to the driving of your economy.
You're absolutely right. You need like dedicated policy conducted over decades in order to meaningfully reindustrialize. And that involves starting from the beginning, starting with education. You have to train people to understand STEM and industry and commerce, and then have them understand and train them into these jobs. It's not something that happens overnight. I mean, if you think of, your average trade, that's like 5,000 to 10,000 hours of apprenticeship in addition to, formal training. This is not something that can be done easily. And so there's a misunderstanding. But once again, it boils back down to this notion of financialization. Why would you train people and spend billions of dollars getting them up to speed and motivating them and then having them learn how to do all these complex tasks when that is, years or decades out in terms of returns? You want your returns right away. And so this is why you financialize everything. So, just, another example, let's think of Microsoft. Microsoft has been building Office software for almost half a century.
Mm-hmm.
It still can't get it right. Every time I use Microsoft, it breaks down. It fails. It explodes one way or another. They've been doing this for half a century. Why have they not gotten it right? Because they had a monopoly very early in the game. And essentially, they knew that because they had this monopoly, they could gouge and jerk people around however they wanted to. And essentially, it's simply that software is simply a tool for taking money out of your pocket and just staking a claim to your earnings. this kind of monopoly financialization is what we is the contradiction that we face, and it moves against the need to have rational planned policy. I mean, planning is considered to be socialist, right? So we don't plan. We let the market do what it wants. If you let the market do what it wants, it turns into a monopoly, and then it financializes, and then it gouges. That's the essential logic of it, and you have to move against that current. But if you don't have a policy and a political system that understands that that's necessary, it's not going to happen. And so here we are. For example, Trump has said to the Koreans, you need to build plants in the United States. Well, Hyundai was building a plant. It was the battery plant. And then the other, hand of the Trump administration raided the plant,
Mm-hmm.
arrested hundreds of South Korean workers, many of whom were engineers and executives, and they put them into chains and carted them away. And now Hyundai doesn't know what to do with it. But it's really bad if you turn the pro-US capitalist class in South Korea against your administration. You've done something really, really foolish, and that is currently the situation. We don't know if that battery plant will continue. But what we do know is the vast majority of Korean engineers and executives are saying we are never going close to that place, where we are not going back there ever. And so that's the contradiction. When you don't have policy, when you don't have rational coordination, when you don't have rational planning, you end up with these types of situations. So even where you do it in this piecemeal fashion, you undercut yourself at the same time.
And to your point, just another example to support the point you just made, TSMC was building that chip plant in Arizona, was it? And then they say, we can't find the people to work in this thing. We're not going to. So that's just another example to support your point. Two things I want to hit quickly. One is this situation in the Caribbean. The administration accuses these individuals in these boats of being drug traffickers, provides absolutely no evidence to support the claim. Now he winds up with 2 survivors over the weekend, and now says those individuals are being repatriated to Colombia and Ecuador for prosecution. No evidence that that's exactly why they're being sent. I think they're being sent because their families were telling the truth. They're fishermen, not drug dealers. And then you have Admiral Halsey, the head of Southcom, resigning not even a year into a 3-year commission or appointment, because I believe he saw the writing on the wall. If this thing went south, no pun intended, he was going to get blamed. And he said, you're not putting this one on me. KJ.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is very striking. When you have the early departure of the top-ranking commander of Southcom, that signals something very, very profound. And early departure usually signals a difference in policy. We're right in the middle of an escalation, and you have a sudden departure. These kinds of things don't happen. It's very, very rare. The last time I can think of something like this was MacArthur in Korea when Truman canned him. But so here we are. We have this, what looks to be like an escalation to war, using the pretext of counter narcotics. I mean, I think that's, I think that, that is, very, very poorly substantiated.
Right.
And even if it were, you do not get to strike and kill alleged drug boats randomly. I mean, there is a process, and it's called, the criminal justice system.
Interdiction.
You interdict, you detain, and you prosecute. You don't get to blast them out of the water in that fashion unless you're trying to provoke a war, unless these are simple random acts of terror that are trying to, send a message signaling U.S. military power, or that you're trying to provoke or antagonize until war breaks out. And I think there's an argument to be made that, the new WMD is going to be narcotics or counter narcotics. So I think inside that situation, I mean, it's very clear that Admiral Halsey, his background is in HR. He was, responsible for Navy HR before he became the deputy Southcom commander and then the Southcom commander. And so he knows a thing or two about regulation and policy and law. And I think that from all the accounts that we hear, that there was a strong dissent that Admiral Halsey felt that, essentially that these were illegal actions, as I think it's very clear they are. We're not at war, and if it's drug interdiction, then you interdict and you prosecute, but you don't just kill people on a suspicion. But apparently, according to reports, Hegseth felt that Halsey was not being aggressive enough, and he had concerns about the legality, and therefore they parted ways. But I think it's also important to note that Halsey's retirement follows the departure of many top military officers under this current administration, and it's hard not to notice the color or the gender of the people of these top leaders that are departing. And I think it signals, once again, a kind of dangerous escalation where, on the one hand, people who are more cool-headed and measured are being pushed out, and we see this incredible escalation to war. I mean, 10,000 troops plus warships, fighter jets, a nuclear submarine, and massive military kinetic engagement. All of that is indicative of escalation to war. In fact, I would say that it's rehearsal of air-sea battle and the third offset. And I think that is I think we're going to see more of that. And then we're going to see, once that has been rehearsed out, we're going to see that, transferred to the Pacific.
Final point for you. President Trump now is threatening to send troops into San Francisco, and saying that something happened in San Francisco 15 years ago, and it just has, and they want us there. KJ, your thoughts?
Well, I've noticed that the troops that have been sent to other cities haven't really had very much to do, but they have been cleaning the streets. And I think that's a good thing. I mean, if there are troops, I think that there's a lot of poop that needs to be shoveled and cleaned. And I think they can be put to good use there. But the notion of armed troops stepping outside of the boundaries or moving against the Posse Comitatus Act is very, very problematic. And I think that this is going to be more trouble than it's worth. And I think there's going to be a significant pushback from local people who, if you thought that Portland or other cities were a problem, wait till you come to, the birthplace of the Panthers.
I hope that sense of resistance is alive and well and living in Oakland. I made the point. I've made the point a couple of times, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Los Angeles. Now he's threatening San Francisco and Oakland with the with the resistance history that we've had in Oakland, with the resistance history that we had with the Panthers, with the shootout in Los Angeles, and then even with the gang issues. Hey, folks, if you spend all this time shooting up your own neighborhood, and I'm not advocating violence, and I'm not advocating attacking troops, but if you're spending your time shooting up your own people in your own neighborhood and some true invaders arrive, what are you going to do? Are you a gangster or not? That's what I want to know. KJ, as always, thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate your, man. You're sharp all the time, but today I thought, man, you spent some time working on sharpening that blade. You were good, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, KJ. Enjoy the rest of your day, my brother. All right, folks. I got to thank my guests for joining me today. Thank you all. So, KJ, no, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. New episode tomorrow. Regis Tremblay is going to join us from Crimea so we can get a sense from that side of the world in terms of how this Zelensky meeting went and what the responses are. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the description. Remember, this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Regis Tremblay will join us from Crimea. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a blessed remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.